Welcome to the TTS Talking Educators podcast. Each week we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe, offering exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in educational settings. Hi, my name is Dr. Shaddai Tembo, your host for this week's TTS Talking Educators podcast. I'm a senior lecturer at Bath Spa University, an associate lecturer at the Open University, and an independent writer and speaker through critical early years. Throughout this series, we'll be discussing a range of topics aimed at supporting oracy in primary and early year settings, inspiring you with guidance and resources to enhance your practice. This week, I'm delighted to introduce Rob Jennings as our guest. Welcome to the podcast, Rob. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm doing well. Thank you very much.
And before we get started, perhaps you could just introduce yourself for our listeners.
Yeah, I'm a specialist maths teacher for the last maybe 15 years, and the co-founder of the Dyscalculia Network, which is an community interest company organised to provide help and support for people that are struggling with maths.
Brilliant. And in this first episode, we're looking at defining dyscalculia, trying to understand what that means and thinking about why that can help with mathematical learning. So I guess my first question to you, Rob, is what do we mean when we're talking about dyscalculia?
Sure. We're quite fortunate in the sense that SASC, the Standards Assessment Committee, have just in the last couple of months released a new definition of dyscalculia. And they talk about a more general category of specific learning difficulties in mathematics. And of that sort of, if you like, dyscalculia is a subcategory within that. And it has a specific definition where it looks at pronounced and persistent difficulty with numerical magnitude processing and understanding. What I mean by that is the naming, ordering, and comparing physical quantities, and also the numbers themselves. It also impacts by lack of estimating abilities and lack of understanding of place value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm wondering why it is that perhaps dyscalculia is less well known or understood compared to dyslexia, which I think most people will be more familiar with.
I think in the general public, there's a kind of almost an acceptance of not being very good at maths. And so, I wish I had a pound for every time I heard a parent say to me, "Oh, I've never been good at maths." It's almost that acceptance means that it's okay to be bad. And so I think kind of that's kind of doesn't really contribute to looking at why we're particularly poor at maths in certain areas. I also think that the levels of assessment and understanding of dyscalculia is really lacking. If you look at latest research from centres like UCL and the Mathematics Centre in Loughborough, you can see that it's really, in terms of the neurodiversities, it's the real poor relation in terms of awareness. It's not just in the general public, but also within the education area as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you said at the start about a new definition just being made available. I'm wondering how our understanding of dyscalculia has changed over the past decades. Is that new definition leading to more awareness and diagnosis of that?
Yeah, I think so. I think kind of the change in the definition is a result of research and the experience of people with dyscalculia. I think it's really significant that we do listen to the research and adjust according to what our definitions are for that. I think it's really important. But I think kind of the reason why we set up the Dyscalculia Network in the first place is that there isn't any representation for maths difficulties. And in the same way that other neurodiversities like autism, dyslexia, etc., there is lots of really good support and organisations there. There's really nothing for the maths side. And I think kind of that sort of change and raising awareness is really quite important.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of work to be done around advocacy and, as you say, raising awareness for that.
Yeah.
I think I'm wondering about if I was a teacher or maybe even an early years practitioner, how would I know that a child had dyscalculia rather than perhaps was just finding maths a bit more difficult? What would those telltale signs be, and when would we first begin to notice that?
Well, I think kind of in early years, it's really quite a significant part of the education for all topics, but in particular for maths, where we have the opportunity to play and learn by doing, where we don't have that sort of opportunity later on so much. But there's a number of sort of key indicators for dyscalculia, and one of them is, as I said before in the definition, that numerical understanding about different quantities, and it's really fundamental stuff that impacts on people's understanding what numbers are made up of. If you ask someone, what does a number 5 actually mean? It could almost be that they don't really understand that. They don't recognise the number. They don't recognise what its ordinality or the cardinality is. I.e., what does 5 represents, how many are in that set, for example. And I think kind of that is quite significant. I think lots of people with dyscalculia will really struggle with estimating. So their inability to, and you get some weird and wacky answers to some of the questions you might give them. And so they have a lack of ability to see if an answer is reasonable or not. The lack of understanding with place value. And I think kind of oracy has a lot to play in within that sort of area, because reading and recording numbers is often where you have 16 is read as 61 and vice versa. So I think kind of that's quite a significant area of that. But also, the language is really important, but there's other kind of domain general factors like executive function, working memory, the inhibition and task shifting really does impact on abilities within SPLD and mathematics in general, not just dyscalculia.
Yeah, and I'm wondering now about the long-term implications of perhaps not supporting children with dyscalculia, and what that might look like for an adult who might still be facing some of these challenges. I have lots of students at university who come to me in their first year and they only just realise that they have dyslexia or struggle with reading and those sorts of things. So I suspect that's a very similar case. I don't teach maths at university, but I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I think kind of we're quite fortunate in the sense that the assessment and the support at university seems a little bit better than it is at schools. I think kind of the ability to assess and DSA requirements is quite good. But we're quite fortunate at the Dyscalculia Network to be able to have a number of adult dyscalculians who work with us as volunteers, and they provide us with real understanding of lived experiences. The ability to arrive late for meetings or arrive early, incredibly early, when the bill comes in a restaurant, to avoid that like the plague, and also not understanding what percentages are. One of the adults says that he hates it when someone asks him, "How much do you think my new jacket cost?" Because there's no estimating skills at all. And he gets really anxious because he doesn't want to say something too ridiculously high, or he doesn't want to underplay it because he's going to upset that person who spent a fortune on a new jacket. So it's huge impact on that. There are lots of good assistive tech being developed, which is great, and kind of things like City Mapper, which is a really good way of supporting someone getting around in the city, but it only covers the major conurbations and city areas for that. But
yeah, that's really interesting to hear about those kind of lived experiences of adults who are struggling with dyscalculia and what that might be like on their day-to-day lives when they're just trying to interact and get by. And I can really see how that might affect their sense of self and well-being. It's interesting that you mentioned digital technology there, because obviously that's incredibly helpful for us as adults, but I'm just wondering where that sits in relation to young children who have that, and is that helpful, digital technology? Are you seeing that as more of a resource, or how does that intersect with this?
Personally, I think kind of having my own family, I think we have to be careful of limiting the screen time. I much prefer kind of concrete materials to be able to sort of demonstrate and model how things work. I think maths is quite an abstract topic in general, and the more we can sort of break it down and model how it works, the much more effective that teaching will be.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And you spoke about oracy, so I'm also wondering about opportunities for structured talk within the classroom and what that might look like, particularly in maths classrooms, where perhaps traditionally it's been more of the teacher talking and the students listening.
Yeah.
Are you seeing more of a shift in that in today's world, and how can teachers do more to unsettle that imbalance?
I think kind of we have to look at why the talking is really important. Because it really does support the sort of conceptual understanding of maths. You know, we talked before about moving from a really abstract way of describing stuff. Abstract in the sense that there's a lot of maths that we never use in our daily lives. So it becomes really quite abstract in terms of, I'm talking about volume, I'm talking about area and perimeter and stuff. Often things like concepts that we never use. And that to be able to support that by talking it through and modelling it is really important. I think the talk is really important because it makes our thinking visible, in a sense. It makes us think about it. Forcing the student to talk helps them to sort of almost clarify and structure their thoughts. And it also, as a teacher, it helps us to understand when they don't get it right. So any misconceptions they may have, if they're open and talking about it, enables us to spot that and sort of make a little silent note and say, we're going to go back over that or revisit that. And it's also good to hear between different students. So picking up tips and ideas from our peers is really quite important. It encourages maths reasoning. It reduces the overall anxiety. So I think with my students, if I'm able to get them to talk, whatever it is, no matter how basic it is, they start off talking really softly. And then when their confidence builds, they're much more open to talking and much more louder and just sharing their thoughts. So it does reduce that overall anxiety and helps to, in the longer term, build confidence. It also helps to strengthen the maths vocabulary. Lots of children from early years tend to pick one or two. Why there's so many terms to mean the same thing? I think for subtraction, there's about 7 or 8 different terms that mean the same thing. And the one that's probably one of the most important ones, what's the difference between two numbers? Doesn't even sound like a subtraction concept. So allowing children to talk about the different vocabulary will overall strengthen the understanding and meaning of those terms.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point you raised there about language. I'm thinking about, for someone whose first language is not English, how difficult that can be for them to understand the intricacies of the way in which we speak and the same words.
Yeah.
We have different words, we have the same.
Absolutely. If you think of some of our simple number system, I'm talking about the teenager numbers. 16 in other countries, it's flipped. In French and German, for example, we don't say 10-6. In English, we don't say like 10-6. It comes from what we say it differently to how we write it. So instead of 10-6, 16, it should be 6, then 1. If you think about it in a logical sense. And so that sort of acquisition of language compared as we write and understand it is really, really difficult. And if you come from another country, it's doubly difficult because it's not only the pure language, it's the understanding of the number system that's changed as well.
Yeah, and I'm reflecting on that as I'm learning Chinese at the moment, actually, just to get by in a little bit of language, and their language system is much, much simpler than ours, because we have 11 and 12, which are teen numbers, but they're not spoken as such. Whereas in China, it's 10, shui, 10, 11. So I guess there's a real need for us as teachers to be mindful of those contexts in which children are coming to with their multilingual backgrounds. And I think for now, that's a really useful place to end this episode. So thanks so much, Rob.
Thank you.
I would like to say a huge thank you to our guest, Rob, for joining us and providing such valuable insights. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Educators podcast with me, Dr. Shaddai Tembo, and Rob Jennings. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive follow-up content, including ideas for your setting and links to relevant resources.